As Edge of Fate has been seen as a huge letdown by the vast majority of Destiny 2 community, the raid itself is seen in a different light. With the new expansion system where instead of getting 2 raids and 2 dungeons, we now have 1 new raid and 1 new dungeon. Obviously, me being someone who enjoys endgame content of the raids, I was glad to hear they still will have at least 1 new raid. But with how Edge of Fate has fared in the terms of the story, gameplay, and everything else, I did have some reservations. Now, if you're actually curious about my thoughts on the Edge of Fate expansion, you can check out that video down in the description down below. Now, right off the rip, I'll start with the fact that this is one of the most aesthetically pleasing raids I've ever set my eyes on. Each encounter area has a distinct feel and atmosphere that fits the boss that you are fighting. The way you get to each encounter is also very unique because it is non-linear, meaning that even though you have 4 different encounters, you can select on the order that those encounters show up. So you can either go with 1, 2, or 3, then 4, or 2, 3, and 1, then 4. This type of system only happened once, and it was actually in the Leviathan raid back when Destiny 2 launched, which unfortunately, due to the beauty of the Destiny content vault, is not playable for anyone now. Now, all the encounters are boss fights, so it is kind of going back to what we had back for Last Wish. However, instead of having like a mechanics-based encounter, it is just legitimately only boss fights. And the cool part is that you'd be able to select on which one you would want to go to first by going into the middle area and then going to the compass after you kill all the enemies. And so from there you'd be able to decide on which one you would want to go to, which allows you to have all different unique pathways for all of your runs, unless you are wanting to go directly to the boss, which after doing it the first time, you'd be able to do from there on out. So it does give you that opportunity to just go straight to the boss and take care of, your clear. However, you do still lose out on all the actual encounters and any bonus items that you would get from completing all 4 of those encounters in one run. Now, because the actual order doesn't really matter, I'm actually going to go over and kind of talk about each of the encounters the way that I first cleared it, and then afterwards I'll talk about the other stuff like the epic version and also other details that I may have missed after talking about those encounters. If you're curious on a specific encounter and my thoughts on it, you can always go to the timestamp down below and you'll be able to get there. Agraios Inherent is the most complicated in terms of mechanics, able to be broken down into 3 separate segments to get to damage phase and an additional mechanic to maintain the damage phase. The main goal is to charge up the 5 rings in the central area and then send a designated player to charge up a deflection shield to interrupt the boss. It first starts up with activating the rings by putting in chronons that are dropped by minotaurs that spawn after dealing with an ad clearing phase and killing a Vex mine that spawns in the back of the arena. Now, once the rings are charged, 3 fireteam members will step on one of 3 small plates within the middle of the area to get one of 3 buffs: constant, absolute, and cyclical. These 3 buffs are important as they reflect the copies of the boss that are created and will stand on top of 3 of the 5 platforms that are on the outer edges of the arena. Now, you will have 2.5 minute timer, and the boss will only shoot you once in a while, unless it has some sort of random hatred against you in particular. The next part starts either when the boss gets impatient or one of the buff players that has him focuses their copy of the boss by tuning to the tower below their version. Now, once that is tuned, the other 2 will look at the 5 rings in the middle to see which ones are not fully charged. The other players will run around and grab the chronons to then run through the rings and get them charged once more. In the meantime, that specific copy of the boss that was chosen to be aligned with will then get serious and start to set up a kill beam. You have 10 seconds of trying to avoid its sightline, or you will instantly die. Now, you would be able to avoid getting around it by staying near the different areas that have like debris and all that, but again, sometimes it is very finicky where you may be out of sightline, but you're not fully out of sight for it. It does have some kind of situation where it comes to that, but again, as long as you're able to kind of keep an eye out on that and making sure that you're going behind solid cover, you should be able to avoid getting killed. Now, to stop it, the player with that buff that was aligned will then run through the charge rings after all the chronons are deposited in the correct locations, and then get a grenade that they would be able to use to capture anyone in its proximity and will reflect the shot back at the boss. And then from there, the way that you would use that is, well, one, you would want to make sure that you have at least one person baiting the shot, meaning that they're purposely staying in line of sight and counting down from 10 so that they would be able to get that taken care of. Now, once it gets down to 2 seconds or even 1 second, if you're really close, they'll be able to use that grenade near that player, and then from there, it would actually deflect that insta-kill shot back to that copy of the boss. Once that happens, damage phase starts. Now, the damage phase is pretty straightforward. It is you just aiming at the boss and then trying to keep an eye on where it's going. Now, during that time, you're going to have one of the players go and run through the rings to get that cage grenade once again, because it will try and teleport back up to one of the locations on those towers and then fire another kill shot. You have to repeat that, make sure that you do it at the last second, and you'll be able to extend that damage phase. And you keep on going for about 2 or 3 more times, and then ultimately what will happen is that copy will die, and then you start over, this time with the intention of you choosing a separate person to align with their copy when it comes down to it. Now, overall, the encounter itself is fairly complex, just because, again, you do have multiple moving parts and multiple different stages to it, but once you get into the rhythm of it and feeling exactly what you have to do, you're able to kind of get through it at a reasonable rate. Now, of course, even though it is needed to have everyone be doing something, you still can roughly get everything done with only 3 people, especially if you kind of know how to properly take care of everything. Now, obviously, with it having a long and complex damage setup, does actually give you a bit of a reward by giving you a fairly long damage phase itself. Now, as long as you're able to maintain that extension over and over again, there's a high chance that you're going to be running out of ammo, or at least utilizing your ultimate a few times within that specific damage phase. And again, because of the amount of damage that you're able to pull out, it wouldn't be much of a surprise if you are able to get this down to half health, or even do a 1 phase if you have all the right gear and the right setups. Now, of course, obviously running out of the ammo does kind of suck, but however, again, with the long phase of the mechanics, you are able to pretty much get all of your stuff back, or at least a majority of the amount, and normally that is enough for you to be able to take care of it in the subsequent damage phase. Now, personally for me, I think that this is my favorite encounter for the normal ones, just because, one, the amount of effort that you have to put in for the mechanics that do reward you with a long damage phase, especially if you have someone who's able to consistently extend the damage phase without any real mistakes. Now, again, those type of situations are fairly common, especially if you are doing it more than once. So this shouldn't be taking too long. Usually it would take around maybe 5 or 10 minutes at most, but it's still half of that being the mechanic setup, and then the rest of it being damage phase does make it really nice, where it's the rewards and the effort are pretty much on balance with each other, especially comparatively to what we have dealt with beforehand in other raids and dungeons prior to this. Iatros in return is considered the least mechanical, in my opinion, yet still one of the more survival-dependent encounters within the raid. With only having 3 straightforward mechanics to keep track of, the majority of the encounter relies primarily on survival and also maintaining a tempo. Now, to start off the encounter, you first collect the chronons from the middle of the map and bring them over to a huge hourglass by jumping through the hoop. Now, once it's filled, usually only needing the 6 chronons that are provided at the beginning, one of the fire team members can actually shoot the diamond down below to start the countdown. And at that point, a 4-beat tempo will start, and after the 4th beat, you'll be sent up into the air if you're not in the middle of the air already. So if you're jumping or, dropping down from a higher location, when that 4th beat hit, you'll be fine. So that's always one thing to kind of keep in mind of if you ever want to keep an eye out for that, is on the 4th, just do a quick jump and you'll be okay. Now, during this entire thing, 3 of the fire team members will sync up to shoot one of the 3 boxes on 3 of the pillars around the area, so they'd be able to build the steps for the fourth member to climb and activate a node. Now, underneath that specific step, the base will have a platform that you would want to grab the buff for that specific staircase. Now, once you're able to get it, you will then be able to go up and hit the node every single time that they create one. Now, the other two fire team members will essentially be just trying to keep the chronons being deposited into the hourglass to make sure that there isn't going to be a 10-second white mechanic from happening. Now, once the steps are all climbed, which is only 3, and all 3 nodes are activated, you will then get to damage phase. Now, the damage phase will start where the base of the steps are, and it's actually kind of very unique when it comes to it, just because the boss is a huge wyvern that doesn't stay in one place. It will always just keep moving away, and because it is a wyvern, it does deal a ton of damage. So having a solar warlock, either utilizing Song Flame or Well of Radiance, is pretty much a big requirement when it comes to actually fighting this. Now, during the actual phase itself, the hourglass will still drain of time, so you will want to have at least 1 or 2 chronons on hand just to kind of hop through, but it does go at a much slower rate, so as long as you're able to put in a decent amount beforehand, there's a very high chance that you won't need to put in anything further for that. Now, with this encounter being pretty short when it comes to it, because again, you're able to do everything within maybe a minute or so, it's not a long damage phase as well. So when it comes to the simplicity of everything, the main thing will be is just keeping that tempo and then also minding your location, because obviously there's a bunch of holes in the area, and so if you're not paying attention and that final tempo hits, there is a chance that you may fall into one of the holes, and so it could be caught off guard. But as long as you're able to know where you are and keeping your footing and maintaining the actual tempo, the entire thing is just a cakewalk, because even the survivability, all you really need to do is just hide behind something or have a healing rift or some sort of healing ability, and you'll be fine relatively. Now, if there are other mechanics that were involved, I could see this as being a little bit better, but again, the main focus being the simplicity of it, the survivability of it, is kind of the only reason why I would say this is possibly one of the weakest ones, if not the weakest encounter of the 4 encounters that happen within the normal. Epoptes, Lord of Quanta, is the most interesting encounter because the mechanics to get to damage phase can be completed by only 2 people, while the damage phase itself actually requires everyone to participate in some way or form to keep the damage extension going. Now, the layout itself is different from the other encounters, since this is the only area that has 2 smaller rooms instead of just being one big single arena like everything else. Now, the mechanics are primarily based around bosses' shields and the eyes that are on them. Now, obviously, the first thing you would do is do the add cleared phase, but then afterwards what will happen is 2 people will stand on the plates on the opposite sides of the room right outside the entrances to the small rooms. Once they get the buffs, they'll then enter their rooms specifically. While inside the room, they're going to be dealing with a mini version of the boss that will have their shield and a specific eye that will provide a cone of light. They need to stay in that light and then communicate back and forth on which eyes they need to shoot. One room will tell the other room what to shoot and vice versa. Now, after shooting more than half of the eyes, or if for any reason it's taking longer than expected, the initial white mechanic will start, and then a triangle will show up above the boss's heads. Now, normally, someone who is not in the room will then get the buff on those same plates, and then follow the main boss, which is in the middle, and into their respective cone of light. They'll then tell the people inside their room which part of the triangle to shoot. Now, once that happens, the people who are circling the main bosses will then go and aim at the opposite person's triangle and then shoot the ones that were not called. And then it just goes back to the normal situation where you will then have to go and get the buffs, and then they'll go back into the separate rooms. Now, once the players inside the rooms finish shooting all the outside eyes within their separate areas, they will then shoot the middle eye and then kill the boss within their separate rooms. Now, once both are dead, the damage phase begins. Now, of course, this is where it gets to be more participation focused. Now, to keep the actual damage phase going and even allowing people to do damage, 2 people will be chosen at random and will be tossed into the chat itself to stay within the boss's light cone. Now, there always are going to be 2 people, so one person's going to go into one, the other one's going to the other one, and that will remove the immunity system to do the damage. Now, eventually, 6 small eyes will show around the main eye that's of the light cone. You take those out, and once you take out the actual eye of that shield, the shield will disappear. Now, once both shields are destroyed, you do get a bit of a respite, and then extension of the damage phase is applied on that one. Now, this does repeat 3 times over, with everyone having to go at least once before the damage phase ends. Now, because it is a very long time, as long as you are consistent and making sure that you're taking care of the extensions, taking down the shield as fast as possible during the damage phase, you'll likely kill the Epoptes before you even have to worry about another damage phase. But again, once you get through those 3 times of extension of the damage phase, and you still aren't able to kill them, you just repeat and do the same thing as well. Now, I say this is a unique encounter just because even though there are multiple things that multiple people can do, you only really need just 2 people to do the stuff on the outside and the stuff in the main area. So technically what you would just need to worry about is just making sure ad clear is taken care of. For the other 4 people, that's their job. But again, if you want to make it a little bit easier, you could always have 2 people focus on the triangle system on the inside of the main area, while the other 2 will just kind of work on the outside part within the small rooms. But again, if you are efficient enough, fast enough, and you know how to do it properly, and you have really good communication with your other teammate, you'll be able to do this with just 2 people and in a very relatively short time. Now, the fact that even though it is a non-moving boss, again, you're just focusing on a single point, the fact that you do have to have everyone part of it to help extend the damage phase does make it very nice, just because 1, it forces people to actually participate and not just passively kill and shoot. You actually need to do something to actually get some benefits out of it. And I think that aspect of it is nice and should be something that's more promoted when it comes to everything else. Because again, as much as it is very straightforward, it's still the aspect of only needing 2 people to do all the mechanics in that encounter, when in reality you would be needing to, if you can require more people to do it, then, you know, it would be better personally when it comes to that. But I do like this fact of needing every single person to participate in the damage extension part, because obviously you still have that participation going, even though it may not be as impactful as setting up the mechanics for the damage phase. Now obviously, like I said before, the fact that this layout is separate, where it's different in terms of having a main arena and then 2 smaller areas, does make it nice, because again, it does also work with the different aesthetics that it has versus the other encounters that are processed there, especially keeping the unique part of that, having that separate areas for those mechanics to happen within there. Koregos, the Worldline, is the final encounter and can be accessed either after going through each of the encounters first, or can be selected right off the bat if you've already finished the raid previously. Now, the way the mechanics work is complicated as first, but it's easy to understand once you get the rundown on them. Once the encounter starts, and you kill the mini-bosses and Vex Mines that show up, you split up into 3 different teams and step on one of 3 plates at a side to the closest of the boss. Now, you can set it up where you have 3 groups of 2, but with how the mechanics work, the best way to set it up is 3 on the left plate, 2 on the middle, and then 1 on the right plate. The plate on the left gives the constant buff, which allows the fireteam members to stop the laser attack from Koregos and also allows players to see the color of the mines. The right plate gives the cyclical buff, which allows you to see if the mines have a chron on it or if it doesn't, and deposit them into hourglass. The middle plate gives you the absolute buff, which allows you to see what color chronons the hourglass in the middle needs, and you could also destroy the mines. Now, while you have 2 of the fireteam members with the constant buff disabling the lasers, the other 4 would just need to do the mechanics. Now, to have the ability to actually determine specifically what they need to find and how they would need to take care of it, they would actually need to get something called the Temporal Oculus. Now, that is something that you would be able to get after hopping on one of 4 different mini pylons that will have a little ring around it. Now, once it's active, it's only active for 10 seconds, but that's more than enough time for you to figure out exactly which 2 chronons are hidden in which 2 mines, and then take care of those and deposit that in. Now, that aspect does kind of have a bit of a situation when it comes to it, because ultimately you have to deposit those chronons pretty much at the same time. If you wait a little bit, the color will change, and if you were to jump in with that same chronon, you will die. So highly recommend if you are going in at 2 at a time, do it right after another or at the same time if possible. Now, once you deposit 6 chronons, you'll then get over to the next part of the actual mechanics. And this part is a little bit easier, but also still requires at least 1 from each team to actually accomplish this. So once you do the little small mini jumping puzzle, there's going to be 4 different pillars. Each pillar will have a myriad of 3 cubes. However, for the constant and cyclical buffs, they're only going to see 2. What they're going to do is they're going to stand where it is missing, while the absolute is going to activate the one that they see is not connected to either the constant or the cyclical guys. They'll have to do that 4 times to actually get to damage phase. Now, the damage phase is fairly straightforward, but also has a couple of things involved. So you aren't going to be moving around that much. However, there is going to be a laser that will do a lot of damage, so it is required to have a Well of Radiance or Song of Flame, unless you just want to move back and forth to avoid the actual laser. Now, to extend the damage phase, there is going to be a hoop and also 1 of 3 chronons. All you have to do is that one person is going to get the chronon that matches the hoop, hop through it, and then you're able to extend it. And that's pretty much it. Now, the actual boss does have a final stand phase, unlike the other ones in the normal mode, but the amount of damage that you have to put during the final phase is pretty small compared to the other aspect of the full bar that you have to do, and so usually by the time you get to final phase, you essentially are able to take care of it without that much of a problem. Now, I'm going to be upfront. Even though this is a massive boss with a lot of moving parts during the mechanics phase, which I really do like, the fact that the damage phase is just a single hitbox when you don't really need to move that much, if at all, is kind of a bit of a letdown, especially after you have the damage phase extension mechanics of Epoptes, and even the movement of the bosses from Iatros and Agraios. Now, obviously that is the only really bad aspect that I would really say about the encounter. The rest of it's still really good. The enemy density is reasonable, so if you're not able to get it done within a single damage phase, you'll still be able to get enough ammo and also generate your super backup, so next time you go into it, you'll be able to do it without that much of an effort. Now, obviously everything else connected to this, especially with the aspect of the different mechanics, different phases, and the fact that everyone is able to do something within there, even though, again, it is one of those circumstances of you only need 3 people to really do the mechanics. It does make it feel a little bit better, especially since the setup that I've provided you earlier on is the most efficient way of doing it, because even though you have 6 minutes to do it, as the white mechanic happens, if you aren't able to do it within 6 minutes, you never really have to worry about it. I mean, hell, the fact that I even brought it up now after talking about the entire encounter in general does show how much of a non-issue it is compared to everything else that could go wrong. Now, overall, the raid itself is still a really good raid. Highly recommend you try it out, especially because the actual aspect of having 4 different bosses that each feel unique in their own way, and also the ability to chain them in different ways so you don't have to always go through the same order each time, does make it very nice of a way to kind of feel the unique aspects and what they were thinking of, as well as giving a nice callback to a mechanic that was not ever shown ever since the first raid within Destiny 2's lifetime. Now, during the mid-season update with Ash and Iron, they introduced the epic version of Desert Perpetual. In a nutshell, it was the prestige version of the original raid, with added mechanics for each of the encounters. Now, the amount of changes varied depending on the encounter, with the least amount of changes being Agraios, while the most amount of changes was to Koregos itself, which is just an entire revamp of the encounter, to be personally the best encounter ever created for this raid. Now, the changes make it more involved with each of the encounters, either by penalizing you for not using the right chronon color, or having someone be a translator to which eye you would have to shoot, which does improve the encounters immensely since it does require more coordination and more understanding of the encounter to efficiently complete it. Now, another aspect that does come into play is the order you complete the encounter. Subsequent encounters will then have an additional mechanic that you would have to adapt to that will culminate in the final encounter. Now, the biggest change to the epic raid is the Koregos fight, which is now Koregos Fracture in Time. And to avoid having to go through every single different change and possibly extend this video longer than it is right now, I'm going to only be focusing on the final encounter because of course that one is just a complete revamp from what it was originally. Now, the structure of the actual fight itself is in the form of not just a single damage phase, but actually 5 separate phases. 3 of which will have a mini encounter with a boss connected to it that you would have to do to actually even get to the damage phase for that. Now, those mini encounters that I was referring to also actually have to connect to how you ordered the actual original encounters. So depending on how you went through the original 3 bosses, you will actually have to deal with them in that specific pattern during the actual fight within Koregos for this one. Now, the main basis is just trying to destroy all the crystals in the main area by using the buffs that you get from the mini encounters. And so, to kind of get that started, you first need to figure out exactly what color of the chronon is underneath the crystals themselves. Now, this is something that will just happen naturally. There isn't really anything that you would be able to do to accelerate it other than reducing the time frame that you have, which later on you find out is actually the damage phase. Once you find out what color chronon that is, you kind of let the timing go through, try and have it finish up faster. You can slightly accelerate it, but then once that phase ends, you're back to the beginning, but this time on phase 2. Now, every single time a phase changes, it literally is just going to start back to the same spot that you were originally. However, whatever you do in the previous phase will impact what you do in the next phase. So, in this situation, once you figure out what the color chronon is from the previous phase, you go in and lock the color of the chronon that you found out, and then when that's done, you will then go to the first mini encounter that you have unlocked. And just like I said before, whatever the order of the encounters that you have completed before hitting this final boss will also be the actual order of mini encounters that you will have to deal with throughout the different phases. Once you complete the mini encounter, you'll then defeat the boss within there, come back out into the main area, destroy the crystal, and then you can start the damage phase. Then, when the timer runs out, you will then get teleported essentially back in time. And now, instead of going to the beginning of the first phase, you'll now be going back to the beginning of the second phase and then start up once more. You do this 2 more times, taking care of the other 2 encounters that you have completed within those mini encounters and get to the damage phase. And then once you get over to the final stand, you will then have a little jumping puzzle that you will need to do. And you would want to make sure that you are in a specific order because at each different location there will be a small node that you would have to get to refresh the buff that you have, because of course if you do run out of it, you will die. So now once everyone gets their buff refreshed and you're able to get to the final plate, you'll then just go into final stand and then take out Koregos once more. I love the changes that they've made to Koregos, especially with the addition of the mini encounters and the entire revamp of the original encounter itself. Now, even though you still technically deal damage the same way, you still have other mechanics to deal with, either the tempo from Iatros, the beam of death from Agraios, or the jail drones from Epoptes. As well as the fact that they use the time manipulation to keep the encounter within the same pocket of time, which, funny enough, is also supposed to be the white mechanic since Koregos is automatically enraged. So, they already set up the premise of this being potentially over if not done correctly within the first attempt, which does add a nice level of suspense on your initial run. Now, of course, that fades away fairly quickly once you know what to do, but the basis that they set up that expectation right there and then does make it more interesting for me, especially since instead of it just being a normal 3-phase situation for, damage phase at most before the enrage mechanic kicks in, you are in the rage mechanic already but you're able to do it up to 5 times, with the 5th one being the final phase. So the changes for that does make it a lot better, and I think that because of that, they make it so that it's more interesting and more engaging, because you're not 100% sure of where you are in terms of your phase counters, because it's always going to be the same phase unless you're keeping track of it. Now, that is specifically kind of makes this one of the most unique encounter, and obviously my favorite encounter of all the versions of the raid, versus, you know, epic or the normal one. And I think it's really great that we have this type of situation in place for that. Now, I didn't add this in until after, obviously, because these changes are kind of what's likely what we're going to be seeing from here on out when it comes to different endgame content. So instead of having a master mode like what we had back in Salvation's Edge and also previous raids before this, we now have a feat system. Essentially what they are is just modifiers that you unlock when you complete the raid that allows you to do challenges within the actual encounters, like doing specific counter challenges, reducing the number of damage phases you would have for bosses, and reducing the amount of res tokens you have available, as well as other different aspects that can come in, like increasing the actual amount and potentially setting it up to be in contest mode. It's a nice way to really spice up the challenges when it comes to the raid itself, especially if you've gone through it multiple times, and also you are incentivized to do so by having upgrades in the tiers from the loot that you get, as well as being able to get additional gear on top of that. Now, that actually, the whole gear increase in tier system is where I actually have a bit of an issue with it. Now, I understand that you would want to have players do the challenges more often, so it's not just like a one and done situation like you see in previous raids. But the problem is that when it comes down to doing it normally, meaning that no challenges whatsoever, you only get like tier 3 gear at base. So if you want to do any farming for either the armor or for the weapons, you have to run the challenges and you have to hope that it drops. Because once you actually get to the final chest and open it up, the actual tiers themselves also are restricted to which weapons you have found at that tier. Meaning that if you found a crossbow at tier 5, that's the only thing that you would be able to get at tier 5. But if you found it at, if you found a assault rifle or an auto rifle or another weapon or some type of gear at tier 4, you can't increase that to tier 5, and you kind of can't really do much about it until you find it at that level of tier 5. So the problem that comes down to everything is that you get to the point where you are stuck dealing with this specific level of tier system, because obviously you have the challenges, but then also on top of that, you need to make sure that you have to hope that you do get what you wanted within the actual raid itself, so that you would be able to actually access it and be able to take it and claim it as well, just as like an additional amount. And I think the issue that I have for that is the fact that it's like, I get why they have it set up in that way, because it kind of fits the same method as the portal system, but the problem is that even though the portal system has it where it goes up depending on the tier left that you have, in this situation, this is just like you need to have the feats on, but it's still like you're going into endgame content. Why are you just going to only get normally tier 3 gear? Again, if they do change this later on and this is just like completely, changed up, that's a completely different circumstance altogether when it comes to it. I'm fine. But when it comes to the actual like tier leveling system up, personally for me, if anything, I would rather have the actual challenges give extra gear and extra loot with the chance of it being like a tier above than just forcing me to always do these challenges to get the required tier. Meaning that it feels like, you would still be able to get like tier 4 even if you did it normally, or tier 5 if you did it normally. Not, I have to have 3 different feats on to get to tier 4 or to tier 5. And I think that's the one main problem that I have with this. But again, that's just kind of the loot system itself and not really reflective of the actual raid. So again, it's a bit of an issue that I have within it, but if you just are focusing on the raid and don't really care for the loot, it really doesn't have much of an impact on it. The entire raid itself is fun, and how unique every encounter is, as well as the epic version bringing in revamped the final boss along with additional changes to the other 3 encounters, makes it worthwhile going through both the raids, first the normal one and then the epic one, and experience it when you can. The feats bring in additional challenges that make the raid more engaging, with change of how you would run through the raid, and also being rewarded with better gear. And again, the only downside being the loot system, which really doesn't have that much of an impact in terms of how the mechanics are. This raid honestly would rank at around the top 3 raids of Destiny 2 so far, especially because you are brought back with the non-linearity system in place, as well as having those unique different areas, as well the fights do feel different when it comes to it, utilizing either participation, momentum, tempo, or just trying to keep sure that everyone's on point when it comes to those type of circumstances. But what do you guys think? Am I right on something? Do you disagree with some things that I say? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like what you've watched, hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more reviewed videos like this. If you do want to see the first clear for both the normal one and the epic version of the raid, click the links down in the description, or just click the videos that are on right now. There you go. But with that being said, until next time, I'll see you guys in the next review. Take care.